Hello everybody and welcome back to our lecture series. I am Ted, your host, and for this lecture we're going to continue with our examination of Mesoamerican history. And in our last lecture um, we looked at the Olmecs and how they will become the progenitors, the originators of all of the key or core aspects of Mesoamerican history. Well, not just history, but not even history, but all the cultural markers. They would establish the first calendar in Mesoamerica. They would begin the first writing system. They would found or invent the first writing system. They would set all of the religious traits, characteristics of Mesoamerican states. And more importantly, they would begin the agricultural tradition in Mesoamerica, and also the trade tradition and in particular of using obsidian weapons and of using particularly jade had a very prized trade item. And now moving on from the Olmecs, the next great culture in Mesoamerica will be the Mayans. Um, and the Mayans are notable for a number of things. For one, they created the first great written language form, written writing system, the greatest writing system in Mesoamerica, I should say. Um, and then they also released a lot of military conventions. They remind me a lot of the Greeks in that they were fiercely independent city-states who warred amongst each other, but shared a lot of cultural and linguistic practices. And really just to sort of give to sort of build on that comparison, just how we have descriptions of warriors and battle outcomes, and sort of like the careers of these real historical persons coming from classical Greece. We have the same coming from the Maya period. For example, we can go back to January 16th, the year 378. There, a Mayan general named Smoking Frog from the city of Tikal um, led the army of the great king of Tikal, great jaguar Paul, into battle against the rival city state, Uzactum. He captured that city, and Smoking Frog was allowed to rule that city for 18 years, and he built a statue of himself with a large life-size parrot feather headdress. Um, it included body armor and weapons, of course. There were these elaborate spools in his stretched out ears. He had, I guess, well, what most people might think of as gauges, but he had these elaborate spools in his and stretched out cavities in his ears, and he had this heavy necklace of beads, and in the beads, the necklace and the headdress, they all denoted his high status in Mayan society. Around his waist, he had a wide belt, and trailing beneath that belt, trailing under that belt, was a bundle of bright feathers, feathers from the Quetzal bird. In one hand, he held a long wooden club studded with razor-sharp bits of obsidian. Obsidian, of course, is the prized tool for weapons. And in the other hand, a spear thrower that was used to fling darts at his enemies. Now, we know all of this about Smoking Frog, and we know um, and we know we have this great depiction of Smoking Frog, because unlike all other previous societies, the Mayas developed a fully articulate writing system, and they also developed this very articulate and intricate sculpting tradition. That description of Smoking Frog, that all come from a statue, a life size statue that he had erected. Um, and also his deeds were recorded in Mayan annals, in the annals of the city of Tikal. They were all recorded. The Mayans were among the longest lasting cultures of the Americas, and they achieved a remarkably high level of sophistication. They also created one of the most geographically extensive cultures. They left behind written records along with great archaeological sites. Uh, the Mayans rose the Mayans arose in the tropical forest of Mesoamerica, in the southern tips of Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Costa Rica, and eastern Honduras. By the year 500, this area was occupied by little city states who were farming the core staple crops of beans, corn, squash, and of course chili peppers. The crucial role of corn to the Maya is verified by their own mythology and, of course, archaeology. Analysis of Mayan remains indicate that they ate more corn than any other foodstuff, and Mayan creation myths center on humans being constructed by the gods using a dough made from corn and blood. Corn and blood also feature prominently in Mayan culture. Now, the Mayans, they fermented the corn. They produced an alcoholic beverage known as chicha, and chicha is still quite popular in Mesoamerica. When Ferdinand Columbus, the son of Christopher Columbus, when he tried chicha, he said it was quite tasty, and chicha has a certain appeal to it. It has a certain charm. The core of the Mayan lands were also a source of cocoa. And cocoa will become a very highly traded pride commodity, with the upper classes drinking a variant of modern chocolate. This will be a spicy drink served cold. Cocoa beans, beads, salt, bolts of cotton cloth, they were all used as currency by the Mayans. In private families, they grew gardens. They maintained gardens, and in these gardens they grew herbs, chilies, tomatoes, guavas, papayas, pineapples. These were all popular fruits, all popular foodstuffs. Palm trees were used to make palm oils, and the fronds were used to make thatching for roofs. Palm resin was also used for religious purposes. They would turn the resin. They would use the resin, I should say, as an incense, and we burnt as a burnt offering to the gods. Now, Mayan civilization reached its peak around the years 250 to 900, a period known as the Classic Maya period. Now, the Maya were not a unified political entity, but a collection of city-states, much like the Greeks or the Sumerians. These collection of city-states controlled local areas, and they were ruled by hereditary kings by a council of priests and noblemen. These local governments imposed taxes, they governed the urban and rural centers, they organized trade, they controlled foreign diplomacy, and of course they waged war with one another. They also oversaw the construction of monumental buildings in the main city. These centers were home to skilled craftsmen. They were home to scribes. The armies. They were where the army were concentrated, but the vast majority of the population of these city-states lived in the countryside, and they were engaged in agriculture. One of the largest and most important urban centers during the Maya was the city-state of Tikal, located in the center of the southern half of the Yucatan Peninsula. Now, the city of Tikal proper, stretches out over 6 square miles, and it's encompassed by a protective moat and rampart. Tikal was the second largest urban center after Teotihuacan during this period. Tikal is not located by a river. The people at Tikal, they had to collect rainwater in a series of cisterns for their own survival. Now, Tikal is one of the more popular Mayan sites. It is home to 5-step pyramids, each of which has a temple on top. The tallest of these pyramids is some 230 feet high, about the height of the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan. Tikal also boasts a series of palaces, a number of plazas and courtyards, and of course temples. Almost all of which are constructed out of limestone blocks, adorned with relief carvings or painted plaster. Now, scattered around the sites are stone stelae with inscribed Mayan glyphs, and they tell the story of great figures from Tikal's history. The story of King Great Jaguar Paw, the epic of Smoking Frog. They're all on these stelas, on these stone steles. Tikal also features a number of special enclosures for a very important Mayan ritual, the ball game. Now, as I stated earlier, this ball game is a descendant of the ball game played by the Olmecs, and it would hold a special place in all of Mesoamerican society. Throughout Mesoamerica, this ball game was played, and it was played for entertainment purposes, but it also carried a very strong religious tone. The ball courts are often just stone courts. The rules of this game are not really well known. But we do know from depictions on pots that the players had to direct the ball towards or through a set of rings set high up on the wall. They had to do this using their hips, their shoulders. They did not use their hands. The ball was made of a hard rubber, so the player wore padding on their hands and their knees, along with a U-shaped belt. And the U-shaped belt was used to cushion the hips and the ribs. They wore elaborate animal headdresses topped with quetzal feathers. And really, the mechanics of the game are quite similar to soccer or football. You know, it's a game where you're not using your hands, where you're using other parts of your bodies but your hands. In the Mayan belief system, the ball game was played in commemoration of a similar game in which two siblings and the gods in the underworld had to battle each other in this ball game, and this was a very calm, I'm sorry, I'm a bit tied tongue right now, but it was a very common, very central feature of Mayan mythology, of the Mayan religious structure. In this ball game, between the two siblings, the two twin brothers, and the gods of the underworld, one of the siblings had its head severed, and the gods decreed that its head was to be used as the ball. So you had this, and again, this is a bit gruesome, but it is a part of the myth. We had the two siblings. One is beheaded, and a severed head is used as the ball in this game. And the sibling who had lost his head, he was given a substitute head made from a squash. The siblings went on to win the game, and after they won the game, they decapitated the gods of the underworld, and they resurrected their father. Their father was the god of corn. Now, the corn god had been killed and then buried underneath the ball court. Now, the corn god was reborn as a stalk of maize on the ball court, and in the underworld, he grows from that stalk corn on the ball court, and he grows into the realm of humans. Now, the Maya played the ball game to reenact this myth, and after the game was over, the losers were sacrificed as an offering and a thanks to the corn god. And of course, this was all done to thank the corn god for sacrificing himself so that they can be fed. It's a very rich tapestry of ideas there in this blood corn myth. Now, for the Maya, there was a very strict division between the supernatural and the natural worlds. In Mayan cosmology, the universe was made up of three realms: the upper world and the underworld, as well as the realm of the humans. The underworld And all of these worlds were home to their ancestors, their gods, various spirits, and they all sort of shared the middle world with humans. They also believed that there were four quadrants to the universe that were aligned with the four cardinal directions, and each of these quadrants of the universe, they all had their own color, and they were all associated with a specific god. Each direction also had their own tree, their own bird. The east, which is associated in nearly every culture with the rising sun, was symbolized by the color red. The west was linked to the underworld, and its color was black. The north was white. The south was yellow. And the center of all of this was green. So the Maya were polytheistic. They had a number of gods, and these gods and their attributes, they overlapped from culture to culture. And we have found names of over 250 Mayan divinities. Mayan gods were distinct entities, but they were narrowly defined by just a couple of qualities. And they had these very fluid identities. That is, they shifted through different manifests, all of which had their own name and their own abilities. Now, we typically identify this god cluster. We typically identify this as the god cluster, and we do this to we identify it that way to reflect on the multiplicity of these gods. Now, at times, these gods exhibited very different qualities and attributes, and it all really depended on the manifestation. At times, these gods would change genders, and their treatment of humans, the treatment of humanity would also change depending on their manifestation in a certain culture or in a certain context. Now, god depictions change depending on their manifestations, and they would change from humans to humanoid with animal features to just fantastic beasts with almost no human characteristics. One of the most important Mayan gods was Shak, the rain god, who was pretty much always depicted with features of aquatic life, like catfish barbels or fish scales. He is thought to live in caves where the Mayas thought that storms came from, and Shak is usually a benevolent god. He was also one of the oldest gods in Mesoamerica, being worshipped in one reincarnation or one incarnation or another. He can also be associated with the rain god Talak. Talak was the rain god of Teotihuacan. He would later become a very important god to the Aztecs. Now, the importance of rain gods is really linked to the agricultural cycles and the very dependent nature of these cultures on the crops. And of course, all crops are dependent on rainfall, or at least water. And the primary way of garnering water for these, for many sites in Mesoamerica, was through rainfall. Now, religion infused all aspects of Mayan life. It influenced the government, war, and of course their economy. Education was intended and originally limited to the priest, because with the priest and the priestly caste who had to read and write had the part of their religious observances. Mayan mathematicians and astronomy pretty much focused on timing ceremony for the gods and important festivals. The Mayans grew adept at astronomical observations and kept very careful records of natural phenomena. They were far ahead of their counterparts. Bloodletting. Bloodletting was also a very important feature in Mayan rituals, and human blood was very important. It was a very important substance in Mayan society, Mayan culture. The highest type of sacrifice were human sacrifice. The gods needed human blood for sustenance, it was believed. Blood offerings consisted of your own blood, an animal's blood or someone else's blood. Self-inflicted bloodletting was a pretty standard form of worship in Mayan society. They commonly pierced areas like their tongue, their ears, or their arms with sharp stones or even thorns. The resulting blood was allowed to drip onto paper, and of course, this would be the paper made from tree bark. The blood was sometimes collected in dishes and presented to the gods. Human sacrifice and, of course, the removal of the heart were also regularly practiced as a way to appease the gods. We know this from artistic renditions on stones and murals that depict sacrifices. The sacrifice would be held down on stones or just on a stone slab, but before their very eyes, their hearts will be removed. There are archaeological evidence that back this up. Decapitation was another very common method of sacrifice. Skulls were sometimes placed on platforms. But these artistic depictions of the blood spurting out from the sacrifice were depicted as quetzal feathers. So you can also sort of see the importance of the quetzal bird and, of course, quetzal feathers and feathers in general being brought back into their understanding of this. The blood, of course, is a very special substance. The gods need it for sustenance. Humans are made from corn dough and blood. The corn god, he sacrificed his blood to save us, or at least to grant us food. And you could sort of see a similarity there with Christianity, in which a very central theme in Christianity would be the sacrifice of Jesus of Nazareth for the benefit of not just his followers, but in Christian theology, for all mankind. He shed his blood so that everybody else would survive. Everybody reaped the benefits of his very real human sacrifice. He sacrificed his human form. He sacrificed his body for everybody, and you can sort of see the parallel, or at least begin to gain into the understanding of this. For the Maya, it was a bloodletting. Giving their own blood was very important. It showed your devotion, and of course, human sacrificing somebody else, showed their devotion as well. There are traditions throughout the world in which some persons would go through what they call the Passion Ceremony, in which they would allow themselves to be crucified, to be tacked up for, I don't know if it's just a couple of hours or a couple of minutes, but they would nail themselves to crosses, and this would be a mark of their piety. They will be whipped, they will be bleeding until they're bloody, and then crucified, and that will be a mark. There are, if I remember correct, there are passion plays in which the entire scene with the arrest of Jesus, with the Last Supper, with the trial of Jesus, and of course the crucifixion and death of Jesus are acted out. And these will be this, and that will be, I guess, the closest, as far as Christianity goes, with identifying and associating with the ball game, and the actual crucifixion, like actually being nailed and shedding blood. That would be a very real association with like the Mayan blood sacrifice or blood offering. Now, the Mayans, beyond blood and corn, they had some very real accomplishments in Mesoamerica. They were the first modern interpreters of Mayan society. They tended to depict Mayans as being very peaceful, and it's almost humorous when you go back and you read their writings on Mayan culture, with what we know about Mayan culture, and it's just completely out of place. It's just it's just very funny to read. They depicted them as very peaceful people, but modern scholarship has focused on the role of human sacrifice in Mayan culture and of course of warfare in Mayan culture. For the Middle Classic Maya period, there was a greater stress on society, and this was mainly due to population growth. They were living in a very productive, a highly productive agricultural area, and that simply spurred great growth in population. There were frequent wars between neighboring cities for resources. While these aspects of Mayan culture are a bit lurid, the Maya were responsible for a number of non-sanguine achievements, chief amongst which would be their written language, Mayan glyphs, and of course the Mayan calendar. Now the Maya developed a mathematical system unlike those used by nearly anybody else. Most systems employ a base 10 system, that is, you count in groups of 10. The Maya system was a base 20 system. Numbers 1 to 4 were represented by dots. The number 5 was represented by a bar. 6 to 9 was represented by a bar with 1 to 4 dots drawn above the bar. The number 10 was represented by 2 vertical bars, and that system was repeated up until the number 20. So the number 15 was 4. Well, not 4. The number 15 was 3 vertical bars. Now 0 was represented by a seashell, and that set the Maya apart from other number systems or other cultures that developed number systems, because, as I stated earlier, the concept of 0 was imported through Eurasia and Africa via the Arabs. The Arabs brought the concept of 0. Nobody else had really ventured on to create the concept of 0 other than the Indians. Indian civilization, I should say. That is no one else besides the Indian civilization and Mayan civilization. The Mayans came up with the concept of 0, and they used a seashell to represent 0. Now, numbers beyond 20 were drawn. Numbers beyond 20 were drawn using stacks of multiples of 20s, and this meant that it would be 20 drawn to various or certain powers, but all the powers would be based on 20. So you would go from maybe 1 to 5, 5 to 10, 10, 15, 15 to 20, and from 20 you wouldn't go to 21 or 25. You would go from 20 to 400, and from 400 to 8,000, from 8,000 to 16,000, and so on and so on. This system was very flexible. It allowed Mayan mathematicians to express numbers in the millions. The Mayan calendar consisted of 18 months of 20 days for a total of 360 days. The Mayan long count calendar, which began on August 11th, 3114 BCE, counting forward from that point. The Maya expressed in counts of 20. They expressed their days in counts of 20s. It would be 20 days, 360 days, 7,200 days, or 144,000 days. Now, the Maya were the only group in Mesoamerica to create a really complex form of written language. The Maya writing system consisted of a mix of ideographs, and these ideographs represented objects and symbols. They represented sounds, and both systems, the combination of both systems led to the Mayan glyphs. We've identified 2,000 glyphs so far, and we have around 15,000 Mayan inscriptions. Now, the Mayans also wrote, had that stated on a type of paper made from bark, but they also constructed books, and again, these books will be made from bark as well. Tragically, however, nearly all of the Mayan books were destroyed by Spanish conquistadors, and we know this because the Spanish they recorded and they gloated about their destruction of Mayan literature. Only 4 Mayan books survived the destruction. The ones that survived And the ones that survive give us the most insight that we have on Mayan civilization. There could be more about Mayan civilization, but we simply do not know. We simply do not have it. The only ones that survived were on the Mayan calendar and, of course, on astronomy. That's why we know so much about the Mayan calendar and Mayan astronomy, because those are the books that we have left. Most Mayan writings were used to record dynastic records. The most that we have left to us, these inscriptions, they record dynastic records, the date of a ruler's birth, his marriage, his death, and any victories or defeats he had during his reign. No Mayan surviving documents mention the Mayan lower classes, and we don't know if whether the books that the Spanish destroyed account for that. But none of the inscriptions, certainly none of the inscriptions that we have from any of the cities or the steles, attest to anything having to do or relating to the Mayan lower classes. For a long time, scholars could not decipher the Mayan language, but when they noticed the frequent occurrence of dates, they were able to use that as a starting point to decipher the glyphs. The examination of the royal tomb at Palenque also provided an important source of information, because that tomb is literally covered with inscriptions. When the inscriptions were finally deciphered, it revealed the most identifiable ruler in Mayan history, a man named Pakal, and his name translates to the shield. Now, in the 8th and 9th centuries, classical Maya society went into decline, the reasons for which are currently unknown. Theories for the Maya decline include overpopulation, overcultivation, drought, soil erosion, deforestation, endemic warfare, and of course rebellion from subject peoples, whether these would be Mayans who were subjugated by other Mayan cities, or simply non-ethnic Mayans who were subjugated by various Mayan principalities or Mayan city-states. During the decline of the Maya, we do know that there was a sharp drop in population, a stop to new building construction. There was an abandonment of older urban centers, and some sites saw massive some sites with massive populations saw drop-offs as high as 80%. Now, that is catastrophic for any group, any city. Some skeletons show signs of malnutrition, and these would be skeletons persons who live between the years 650 to 850. Examination of their skeletal remains show that after 850, power appeared to have shifted to the northern Yucatan Peninsula, where newer cities like Chichen Itza and Uxana were founded. Chichen Itza is one of the more famous Mayan sites. It is very popular with tourists, and that's particularly due because of its close location to the tourist destination of Cancun. Now, Chichen Itza began as a Mayan city, but many more recognizable features of Chichen Itza and its structures are more in line with the later Toltec culture or civilization, and that's because the Toltecs took over the city, and they really made Chichen Itza a Toltec city. The Toltecs flourished after the Maya. As the Maya was fading away, the Toltecs rose. Mesoamerica would continue to develop in isolation until the arrival of the Europeans after Christopher Columbus made contact with the Lucayans on the island of Guanahani, now known as San Salvador in the Bahamas. That great watershed moment, of course, took place on October 12th, 1492. And the best known civilizations in the Americas, the Incas and the Aztecs, we haven't gotten to them yet, but they would establish the large territorial empires that would be greeted by the arrival of the Spaniards. Both empires and cultures would be destroyed by contact with the Spaniards. The ruins of the early societies of the Americas are really prime tourist destinations, and they continue to exert a very strong fascination today. Now, although the later conquest destroyed a lot of these cultures, a lot of their legacy influences our lives, particularly in our diets. Just again to bring up a few: chocolate, the avocado, chili peppers, or just red peppers, spicy peppers, beans and potatoes. They're all domesticated by these Mesoamerican and other indigenous cultures. That'll do it for this lecture, for this portion of our lecture. When we come back, we will look at later cultures, later civilizations, later groups that rose in Mesoamerica. As always, I'm Ted. Hit like, subscribe, and comment, and I'll see you guys next time for another lecture.